I never meant for it to happen like that. During a late-night scroll through my phone in our small Chicago apartment, Dean had sent me this silly online test, one of those viral quizzes promising to reveal how strong your relationship really was, and in a split second of lingering frustration from our earlier argument, my finger tapped the worst boyfriend possible when his name came up as an example. Just a few hours later, my phone lit up with an unknown number, and a calm voice on the other end said, "Is this Joel? Your partner Dean has been brought into the emergency room at Mercy Hospital after a car accident." My stomach dropped. I grabbed my keys, heart hammering, and raced through the rain-slicked streets, the city lights smearing like watercolor across the windshield as tears already burned my eyes. When I burst through the ER doors, the sharp smell of disinfectant and beeping monitors hit me like a wall. There he was, Dean, my Dean, lying on the narrow bed with a white bandage wrapped around his forehead and his left arm in a sling. His usual easy smile replaced by a pale, tired expression. His blue eyes found mine across the room, and something inside me shattered. I dropped to my knees beside the bed, clutching his uninjured hand so tightly my knuckles went white, and the sobs tore out of me before I could stop them. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, voice cracking. "This is all my fault." The doctor stepped in quietly, explaining it was a minor fender bender on the Kennedy Expressway. Dean had swerved to avoid a sudden stop and clipped another car. Nothing life-threatening, just a concussion and some bruises. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All I could see was the man I loved looking small and vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the weight of what I had done crashed down harder than any accident ever could. Dean squeezed my hand back weakly, his thumb tracing a familiar circle on my skin the way he always did when words failed us. "Hey, it's okay, Joel. I'm still here," he murmured, voice rough from whatever pain meds they had given him. But I knew it wasn't okay. The quiz wasn't as anonymous as the fine print claimed. Dean had forwarded the link to our small group chat earlier that evening, and somehow my submission had posted publicly with just enough detail for him to recognize it before he got behind the wheel. I had been angry. Angry that he kept pushing me to come out to my parents when they flew in from Texas next week. Angry that every time I pictured telling them about the man who shared my bed and my life, my chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. Now here we were, surrounded by beeping machines and the low murmur of other patients, and all I could think was how close I had come to losing the best thing that had ever happened to me. Nurses moved around us with quiet efficiency, drawing curtains and checking charts, but the world narrowed to just the two of us. Dean's blonde hair was matted against the pillow, and a small cut above his eyebrow had already started to bruise purple. I brushed a strand away from his face, my fingers trembling. "You shouldn't have been driving upset," I said, the words catching. He gave a weak chuckle that turned into a wince. "Guess I wasn't thinking straight." Literally. The joke landed softly, but the guilt still sat heavy in my throat. I had met Dean 3 years ago at a crowded coffee shop near the Art Institute, where he worked as a graphic designer and I was a marketing coordinator escaping a soul-crushing meeting. He had smiled at me over a spilled latte, offered napkins, and somehow we ended up talking for 2 hours about everything and nothing. From that first afternoon, something clicked. His quiet confidence, the way he listened like my stories actually mattered. We moved in together after a year, built a life in this city that felt safe enough to be ourselves, at least behind closed doors. But safety wasn't the same as freedom, and lately the walls had started closing in. My parents, conservative, church-going folks from a small Texas town, had no idea their only son was gay, let alone living with another man. Every phone call home was a tightrope walk of half-truths and careful omissions. Dean had been patient, but patience was wearing thin. "You deserve to live out loud, Joel," he had said that afternoon before the quiz, his voice steady but hurt. "I can't keep being your secret forever." I had snapped back something sharp about timing and family expectations, and then the quiz arrived like a cruel punchline. Now, sitting in the sterile room with the smell of antiseptic and the distant wail of an ambulance siren, I wondered how many more secrets I could carry before they broke us both. Dean's eyelids fluttered, fighting the pull of exhaustion and medication. "Stay with me?" he asked, barely above a whisper. I nodded, pressing my forehead to the back of his hand. I'm not going anywhere. Outside the curtain, life in the ER continued. Doctors paging specialists, families murmuring in worry. But inside our small space, time slowed. I replayed the quiz question in my mind, the little smiley faces and sliding scale that had seemed so harmless until my frustration turned it into a weapon. I hadn't meant for him to see it. I hadn't meant for any of this. Yet here we were, and for the first time in years, the fear of losing Dean felt bigger than the fear of telling the truth. The nurse returned with discharge papers and instructions for rest, but I barely heard her. All I could focus on was the steady rise and fall of Dean's chest and the promise I made silently to myself. No more hiding, no more accidental cruelty disguised as irritation. Whatever came next. My parents' visit, the conversations I had avoided for so long. I would face it. Because the man lying in this bed was worth every risk. As they wheeled him toward the exit in a chair, Dean reached for my hand again, and I held on like it was the only solid thing left in my world. The Chicago night waited outside, cold and uncertain, but for the first time I felt ready to step into it together. The ride home from the hospital was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional click of the turn signal. Dean dozed in the passenger seat, his head tilted against the window, while I kept stealing glances to make sure he was still breathing steady. The city lights streaked past, turning the wet pavement into ribbons of gold and red, and my mind kept drifting back to the coffee shop where everything began. I remembered the exact moment. Late spring, pollen thick in the air, Dean in a faded blue button-down with sleeves rolled to his elbows, laughing at my clumsy attempt to mop up the spilled drink. "You're making it worse," he had teased, and just like that, the rest of the world faded. We exchanged numbers that day, and within a week we were sharing late-night texts that turned into early morning walks along the lakefront. Dean showed me parts of Chicago I had never bothered to explore. Hidden murals in Pilsen, the best deep dish spots where the waiters knew him by name, quiet benches in Lincoln Park where we could talk without the city noise drowning us out. He never pushed, never demanded labels right away. When I finally told him I had never been with a man before, not really, not openly, he simply nodded and said, "Then we'll figure it out together." Those early months were pure magic. The kind of easy joy that made me believe maybe being gay didn't have to be the complicated, terrifying thing my Texas upbringing had drilled into me. We cooked terrible stir-fries in my tiny kitchen, watched bad horror movies cuddled under one blanket, and slowly built a life that felt like home. But home has cracks, and mine started showing the day my mother called to say they were coming for a visit. "We miss you, honey. It's been too long." Her voice was warm, familiar, and it sent ice through my veins because I still hadn't found the words to tell her the truth. Dean had been understanding at first, suggesting we ease into it, maybe introduce him as a roommate. But the longer we waited, the more it felt like a lie growing between us. That afternoon's argument had started small. Dean wanting to plan a dinner, me insisting it was too soon. Words escalated, old fears surfaced, and then the quiz notification pinged on my phone like some cosmic joke. Now, pulling into our parking spot behind the brownstone, I killed the engine and sat there listening to the tick of cooling metal. Dean stirred, blinking slowly. "You okay?" he asked, voice thick with sleep and pain meds. I forced a smile. "I should be asking you that." He reached over with his good hand and cupped my cheek, thumb brushing the dried tear tracks. "We'll talk tomorrow. Right now I just want our bed and you next to me." We made our way inside slowly, Dean leaning on me more than he would admit. Our apartment smelled like the lavender candle he loved and the faint trace of his cologne. I helped him change into soft sweats, careful of the sling, then tucked him in before sliding in beside him. His body curved toward mine out of habit, and I wrapped an arm around his waist, listening to his breathing even out. Sleep didn't come easily for me. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment I had chosen silence over honesty. My father's voice echoed in my head, The same man who coached my little league team and taught me to change a tire. Saying things about family values that had made me bury who I was for years. College in Illinois had given me space to breathe, to date quietly, but coming home for holidays still meant stepping back into the closet. Dean knew all of it. He had met my parents once during a quick layover, introduced as my good friend from work, and the lie had sat like lead in my stomach the entire weekend. Now, with the hospital smell still clinging to my clothes, I realized how fragile everything had become. Around 3 in the morning, Dean shifted and woke, wincing as he adjusted his arm. "Can't sleep?" he whispered. I shook my head. "Too much in here." He turned toward me, eyes soft in the dim streetlight filtering through the blinds. "The quiz, I saw the results before I left. It hurt, Joel. Not because I think you really believe I'm the worst, but because I know where that click came from. You're scared." The honesty in his voice broke something open inside me. I told him everything then. The nightmares about my parents turning away, the way my chest tightened every time I imagined the conversation, the guilt that I was asking him to live half a life because I couldn't face mine. He listened without interrupting, just holding my hand in the dark. When I finished, he pressed a gentle kiss to my knuckles. "I'm not going anywhere, but you have to decide what kind of life you want. For both of us." We fell asleep like that, tangled together, and for the first time in months the weight on my chest felt a little lighter. Morning came with weak sunlight and the distant sound of traffic. I made coffee one-handed while Dean sat at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone with his good arm. The discharge papers lay between us like a reminder. "Doctor said light duty for a week," I said, sliding a mug toward him. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. "My boss already texted. I can work from home." The conversation we had started in the dark hovered between us, unfinished. I wanted to promise him everything, full honesty, a future without secrets, but the words stuck. Instead, I sat across from him and reached for his hand. "I'm sorry about the test. It was stupid and cruel, and I hate that it led to this." Dean squeezed back. "Accidents happen. What matters is what we do now." We spent the day quietly. Me working from my laptop at the dining table so I could keep an eye on him. Dean napping on the couch with a blanket I tucked around his shoulders. Every time he winced or shifted, guilt flared fresh. By evening, friends started texting. Our close circle, mostly other queer guys we had met through work events, offered food deliveries and well wishes. One message from my best friend Marcus stood out. "Heard about Dean. You okay? Need anything?" Marcus knew everything about us. He had been the first person I came out to, the one who held my hand through the panic attacks when I first admitted I liked men. I replied quickly, grateful for the lifeline. As night fell again, Dean and I ordered Thai takeout and ate on the couch watching mindless TV. Halfway through a comedy special, he muted the screen and turned to me. "Your parents land Friday. You still planning to play the roommate game?" The question hung there, gentle but direct. I swallowed hard. "I don't know anymore." He didn't push. Instead, he rested his head on my shoulder, the sling making the angle awkward but perfect. In that moment, I understood the real accident wasn't the car. It was the years I had spent letting fear drive. Tomorrow would bring more conversations, more steps toward the truth I had avoided for so long. But tonight, with Dean's steady breathing beside me and the city humming outside, I let myself believe we might actually make it through. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of careful caregiving and quiet reflection. Dean's concussion left him with headaches that made bright screens painful, so I dimmed every light in the apartment and read aloud from the mystery novel he had started before the accident. His arm healed slowly, the sling a constant reminder of how quickly life could tilt sideways. We talked more in those quiet hours than we had in months, about his childhood in Minnesota, the supportive parents who had marched at Pride with him since he was 16, the contrast to my own upbringing where the word gay was never spoken except in whispers or warnings. I told him stories I had buried. The church youth group leader who warned us that same-sex attraction was a test from God. the high school best friend who stopped talking to me after I came out to him in a letter I never sent. Dean listened without judgment, occasionally offering a soft, "That must have been lonely." It was lonelier than I had ever admitted, even to myself. Work emails piled up, but I took the week off citing family emergency. My boss, a no-nonsense woman named Carla who had guessed about my orientation years ago, simply replied, "Take all the time you need. Hug Dean for me." The kindness from unexpected places made the secret feel heavier. Marcus stopped by Wednesday evening with grocery bags and a six-pack of Dean's favorite IPA. He hugged me extra tight at the door. "You look like hell, man. Talk to me." Over pizza on the living room floor, I spilled everything, the quiz, the ER, the looming visit from my parents. Marcus listened, nodding. "You know I love you both, but hiding this forever isn't sustainable. Dean deserves better. You deserve better." His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through every excuse I had built. Dean, listening from the couch, didn't interrupt. Later, after Marcus left, Dean pulled me down beside him. "He's right, you know." I traced the edge of his bandage with one finger. "I know. I'm just scared they'll stop loving me." He kissed my temple. "Love doesn't disappear that easily, but fear does if you face it." Thursday brought the first real test. My mother called to confirm their flight details, her voice bright with plans for sightseeing and catching up with your roommate. I froze, phone pressed to my ear, Dean watching from across the room. "Yeah, Dean's looking forward to meeting you properly." I heard myself say, the words surprising us both. The silence on the line lasted half a second. "Oh, wonderful. We'll bring that pecan pie you love." When I hung up, Dean's smile was small but proud. That wasn't so bad. It was a crack in the wall, small but real. That night we lay awake planning how much to say, when to say it, what to do if it went wrong. Dean suggested we start with the basics. This is Dean, my partner. Simple. Terrifying. Friday morning arrived with nervous energy. I changed the sheets in the guest room out of habit, then stopped myself. No more separate beds. Dean helped me move his things into the main bedroom, one-handed and laughing at how domestic it felt. "Feels like we're finally doing this right," he said. My parents' flight landed at O'Hare just after lunch. I picked them up alone, heart hammering the entire drive. Mom hugged me fiercely at baggage claim. Dad clapped my shoulder with his usual firm grip. "You look good, son. City life agreeing with you?" The small talk carried us back to the apartment, but every mile felt heavier. When we walked through the door, Dean stood in the kitchen. Sling still on, smile warm and steady. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, it's great to finally meet you properly." Mom's eyes flicked between us, taking in the shared space, the single set of keys on the hook, the way Dean instinctively reached for my hand. Dad cleared his throat. "Roommate, huh?" The word hung there, loaded. I took a breath that felt like the first real one in years. "Actually, Dean is my boyfriend. We've been together 3 years." The silence that followed stretched long enough for my pulse to roar in my ears. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's face tightened, the lines around his eyes deepening. Then Mom stepped forward and pulled Dean into a careful hug, mindful of his arm. "Well," she said, voice shaky but kind, "I always wondered why Joel never brought any girls home." Dad stood frozen a moment longer, then extended his hand to Dean. "Takes guts to say that out loud, son. Both of you." The afternoon unfolded in careful conversation. Questions about how we met, gentle probing about the accident, Mom insisting on cooking her famous lasagna despite the tiny kitchen. Tension lingered, especially in Dad's quiet moments, but no doors slammed. No one left. That night, after my parents retired to the guest room, Dean and I sat on the fire escape with a shared blanket. "You did it," he whispered against my hair. I leaned into him, the city noise rising around us. We did it. Together. But the real test was just beginning. Saturday brought more talks. Dad wanting to understand, Mom asking careful questions about future plans. I saw the love still there, cracked but not broken. Dean's presence grounded everything. His easy humor eased awkward pauses. His patience gave me space to breathe. By Sunday, when my parents hugged us both at the airport curb, Mom whispered in my ear, "We're proud of you, honey. Both of you." The drive home felt lighter, the weight I had carried for decades finally shifting. Dean reached over and laced our fingers. "See? The world didn't end." I laughed. The sound surprised even me. No. It got bigger. Yet even as relief flooded in, new questions surfaced. How would my extended family react? What about work events where partners were expected? And deeper still, the parts of myself I had hidden not just from others but from Dean, the lingering shame, the fear that I would always feel half-formed. That evening we cooked dinner together, Dean directing from a stool while I chopped vegetables. Music played low, an old playlist we had made on our first road trip. Between songs he said softly, "I'm proud of you, Joel. But this is just the beginning. There's more inside you still waiting to come out." I set the knife down and turned to him. "I know. And I'm ready to find it. With you." The promise felt solid, real. Outside, Chicago lights twinkled like stars brought down to earth, and for the first time I believed we could reach them. Monday morning brought the return to normal life, or what passed for normal now that the secret was out. Dean went back to the office with his sling, fielding jokes from colleagues while I sat at my desk answering the backlog of emails. Every few hours I'd text him, "How's the head?" And he'd reply with a silly selfie or a thumbs up. The lightness between us felt new, like we had stepped out of shadow into actual sunlight. But shadows have a way of lingering. That afternoon my phone buzzed with a call from my aunt in Texas. Mom had apparently shared the news with the family group chat. "Joel, honey, we're all just so surprised. Are you sure this isn't a phase?" Her voice carried the same gentle concern I remembered from childhood. But the question still stung. I handled it better than I expected. Calm explanations, reminders that I was 31 and knew my own heart. When I hung up, Dean was waiting in the kitchen with takeout tacos. "Tough call." I nodded, sinking into his one-armed embrace. "Getting easier, though." We ate on the couch, legs tangled, talking about the future in ways we never had before. Dean wanted to travel more, maybe a trip to New York for Pride. I surprised myself by agreeing without hesitation. The weeks that followed brought small victories and bigger tests. Dean's sling came off, leaving a faint scar that he traced absently when thinking. My parents called weekly now, asking real questions instead of tiptoeing. Dad even sent a text saying he had read an article about same-sex marriage laws and wanted to understand our options. The support was overwhelming in the best way, yet it also unearthed older wounds. Nights when Dean worked late, I found myself replaying childhood memories. The youth pastor's warnings, the locker room jokes that made me shrink inside myself. One particularly rough evening, Dean found me on the fire escape staring at the skyline. "Talk to me," he said, draping a blanket over my shoulders. I told him everything, the shame I thought I had outgrown, the fear that even with my parents' acceptance I would always carry a piece of that boy who felt broken. He listened, then pulled me close. "You're not broken, Joel. You're becoming. And I love every version of you." His words cracked something open. The next day I made an appointment with a therapist Marcus had recommended years ago. Sessions were hard, honest in ways that left me raw, but each one peeled back another layer. Dean never pushed, just held space for whatever I needed. Our relationship deepened in the quiet ways that matter most. Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers, evening walks along the lake where we talked about everything and nothing. One crisp October evening, we attended a small gallery opening where Dean's designs were featured. Standing beside him as strangers congratulated us both, I felt a surge of pride I had never allowed myself before. When a colleague asked how long we had been together, I answered without hesitation. 3 wonderful years. The smile Dean gave me across the room was brighter than any spotlight. Yet growth is rarely linear. Thanksgiving arrived with my parents flying up again, this time bringing Dean's family too. The combined gathering in our apartment was loud, chaotic, and perfect. 2 sets of parents learning each other's traditions, laughter echoing off the walls. Watching Dad and Dean's father discuss football while Mom and Dean's mother swapped pie recipes, I realized family wasn't just blood. It was the people who chose to stay. But the night before everyone left, Dean and I had our first real fight in months. It started over something small, me forgetting to confirm our couple's counseling session, and snowballed into old territory. "You still shut down when things get hard," he said, voice tight. "I'm trying." I shot back, frustration rising. We slept on opposite sides of the bed that night, the silence heavy. Morning brought apologies and coffee in bed, Dean's head on my chest. "I'm scared too sometimes," he admitted. "Scared you'll decide it's too much." I held him tighter. "Never. You're stuck with me." The honesty we had learned in the hospital carried us through. Christmas came with snow blanketing Chicago and lights strung across our windows. We hosted a small dinner for close friends, Marcus included, and when the clock struck midnight, Dean pulled me under the mistletoe for a kiss that felt like coming home. Standing there with his arms around me, laughter and music filling the apartment, I understood the real miracle wasn't my parents' acceptance or even the accident that forced my hand. The miracle was choosing every day to keep choosing him, and myself. New Year's Eve found us on the roof of our building, wrapped in blankets, watching fireworks bloom over the lake. Dean turned to me, eyes reflecting the colors above. "Ready for whatever comes next?" I kissed him softly, tasting cold air and promise. "With you, always." The year ahead stretched out, unknown but no longer frightening. Therapy continued, conversations with family deepened, and our love grew roots that could weather any storm. The man who once clicked worst, in a moment of fear, had become someone who understood that love wasn't perfect. It was the willingness to keep showing up. And showing up, I had learned, was the bravest thing of all. Spring brought change in more ways than one. Dean received a promotion at work, meaning more travel and longer hours, while my own career took an unexpected turn when Carla asked me to lead the company's new diversity initiative. The role felt meaningful, creating safe spaces for employees like us, but it also meant public speaking and sharing parts of my story I had only recently accepted. The first workshop I facilitated was terrifying. Standing in front of 20 colleagues, I talked about the night in the ER, the quiz that became a catalyst, the fear that had kept me silent for so long. Dean sat in the back row for support, his steady gaze anchoring me. When I finished, the applause was genuine, and several people approached afterward with their own stories. That evening, Dean took me out to celebrate with sushi and champagne. "You were incredible," he said, raising his glass. "Proud doesn't even cover it. But success has shadows." An old high school acquaintance found me on social media and messaged a string of hateful comments about my lifestyle choice. The words stung more than I expected, dredging up the same shame I thought therapy had buried. Dean found me deleting the message at 2 in the morning. "Block him, then come back to bed." His simple directive reminded me I no longer faced those voices alone. Summer arrived with heat waves and weekend getaways. We drove to Dean's family cabin in Minnesota for 2 weeks of quiet, swimming in the lake, cooking over fire, talking late into the night about dreams we had put on hold. One afternoon on the dock, feet dangling in cool water, Dean turned to me. "I want to marry you someday. Not because it's trendy or to prove anything. Just because I can't imagine my life without you in it officially." The proposal wasn't grand. It was quiet and certain, like everything real between us. I answered without hesitation. Yes. 1,000 times yes. We didn't set a date, didn't rush. The promise itself was enough for now. Back in Chicago, life continued its steady rhythm. My parents visited again in July, this time staying longer and helping paint the spare room we had decided to turn into a home office. Dad even asked Dean for advice on a new phone, a small moment that meant everything. Watching them laugh together over coffee, I realized acceptance wasn't a single conversation. It was 1,000 small choices to keep showing up. Yet not every bridge mended easily. My uncle in Texas still refused to acknowledge the relationship, sending cards addressed only to me. The rejection hurt, but Dean helped me see it as his loss, not mine. "We build our own family," he reminded me during a late-night walk. Those words became a mantra. Fall brought our first major test as a fully public couple. Dean's company hosted a black tie gala, and for the first time I attended as his official partner. Standing in a rented tux beside him on the red carpet, cameras flashing, I felt exposed but also powerful. When the photographer asked us to pose, Dean pulled me close and whispered, "We've come a long way from that hospital bed." The photo that ran in the company newsletter showed two men smiling like they belonged exactly where they were. The caption read simply, "Dean and Joel, celebrating 3 years and counting." Seeing it online the next morning, I saved the image and set it as my phone background. Small rebellions against the boy I used to be. Winter arrived with early snow and the anniversary of the accident. On the exact date, we returned to Mercy Hospital, not as patients but as volunteers delivering care packages to the ER staff. The same nurse who had discharged Dean recognized us and pulled us into a hug. "You two look happy," she said. We were. Later that evening, we sat in the same spot on the fire escape where so many hard conversations had happened. Dean rested his head on my shoulder. "Remember when you thought one click could ruin everything?" I laughed softly. "I was wrong about a lot of things back then." He turned to face me, eyes serious. "You were scared. There's a difference." In that moment, I understood the full arc of our journey, not just surviving the crisis but growing because of it. The man who once hid in fear now stood openly beside the person he loved. The internal battles weren't over. Therapy continued, family conversations still required courage, but the foundation we had built felt unbreakable. As snow began to fall softly around us, Dean pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know we said no rush, but I couldn't wait any longer." Inside was a simple platinum band engraved with our initials and the date of the accident. The day everything changed. Tears blurred my vision as I slipped it on. Forever sounds perfect. We kissed under the falling snow, the city lights twinkling like witnesses to every step we had taken. The road ahead would still have bumps. Career decisions, family holidays, the ongoing work of loving ourselves, but we would face them together. The boy who once called his boyfriend the worst had learned the hardest truth of all. The only thing worse than fear is a life without the person who makes you brave enough to overcome it. The proposal changed everything and nothing at the same time. We decided on a small spring wedding in Chicago, close friends, both sets of parents, Marcus as best man. Planning became a shared joy. Tasting cakes, choosing flowers, writing vows that felt honest rather than performative. Dean wanted simple elegance. I wanted to include elements from both our upbringings. Compromise came naturally now, the way breathing does when you stop fighting for air. As the date approached, I found myself reflecting on the long road that had led here. The online test that started it all seemed almost comical in hindsight. A silly quiz that forced me to confront the fear I had carried since childhood. Therapy had helped me see the pattern. Every time life asked me to be fully seen, I had chosen silence until silence nearly cost me Dean. The accident had been the wake-up call, but the real work happened in quiet moments. Late-night talks, small acts of courage, choosing truth over comfort again and again. My parents arrived a week early, Mom helping with seating charts while Dad practiced his toast in the living room. The sight of them laughing with Dean's family over rehearsal dinner filled me with a gratitude so deep it ached. The night before the wedding, Dean and I stole a moment alone on the hotel balcony overlooking the river. "No regrets?" he asked, voice soft. I took his hand, the rings we would exchange tomorrow already feeling present. Only that I waited so long to be this happy. The ceremony itself was simple and perfect. Under a canopy of spring blossoms in a small park by the lake, surrounded by the people who had walked every step with us, we promised forever. My vows spoke of the night in the ER, the fear that had once defined me, and the love that redefined everything. Dean's voice cracked when he talked about patience and the joy of watching me become myself. When the officiant pronounced us married, the cheers from our small crowd felt like the entire city celebrating. Reception followed with dancing under string lights, Marcus giving a toast that had everyone in tears and laughter. My father surprised us by asking Dean to dance. A slow, awkward but heartfelt moment that healed something I hadn't realized was still broken. As the night wound down, Dean and I slipped away to the quiet corner of the park where we had first said yes. Fireflies danced above the grass, and the distant city hummed its constant song. "We made it," I whispered against his lips. He smiled, the same smile that had started everything years ago at that coffee shop. "We're just getting started." Life after the wedding settled into a new beautiful rhythm. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood with a backyard for future possibilities. Careers flourished, Dean leading design teams, me expanding the diversity program into a national initiative. Family visits became regular, holidays filled with laughter instead of tension. The old shame still surfaced sometimes, but now I had tools and people to help me through it. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost exactly 4 years after the accident, we returned to Mercy Hospital again. This time for a completely different reason. A young man in the waiting room reminded me of myself at 20. Scared, alone, pretending everything was fine. I sat beside him and quietly shared our story. When he left with a small smile and the number for a support group, Dean squeezed my hand. "Look at you, paying it forward." That evening we cooked dinner in our new kitchen, windows open to the cooling air. Over pasta and wine, Dean raised his glass. "To the man who turned the worst moment into the best decision of our lives." I clinked my glass to his. To us, proof that love wins when we're brave enough to let it. Later, lying in bed with his head on my chest, I thought about the journey. The boy who once hid had become a man who stood openly, loved fiercely, and helped others find their own light. The path hadn't been easy, but every tear, every argument, every brave step had led us here. To this home, this life, this unbreakable bond. Outside, Chicago slept under a blanket of stars, the same city that had witnessed our lowest and highest moments. I pressed a kiss to Dean's hair and whispered the truth I had finally come to believe. We're exactly where we're meant to be, and in the quiet that followed, I knew it was true. Was it right or wrong for Joel to hide his love for so long before the accident finally forced him to choose honesty?